Termination notices usually come with HR protocols, severance discussions, or at least a brief moment of professional courtesy. None of those were present when Chloe handed me my walking papers. She sat behind a pristine mahogany desk, tapping away on a newly unboxed laptop, her high blonde ponytail bouncing as she read a canned termination script off her iPad screen. Standing right behind her was a terrified junior HR staffer, sweating like he was watching someone handle live explosives. Chloe was the founder's newly appointed daughter-in-law, and this was her very first day on the job. She did not offer a handshake, nor did she bother looking me in the eye when she declared that security would escort me from the premises immediately. Armed with a freshly printed business degree, a mountain of misplaced arrogance, and a heavy dose of family privilege, she clearly believed she was executing a masterclass in executive power. I did not raise my voice, cry, or attempt to negotiate. Decades of surviving corporate politics teach you when to hold your tongue. I simply unclipped my access badge, laid it quietly on the desk, and offered a polite suggestion that she remind her father-in-law about the mandatory board assembly scheduled in 3 hours. Walking out of that building felt surprisingly tranquil. I passed the bewildered security officer and the gilded family portrait hanging in the main lobby, which deliberately omitted the person responsible for drafting the very foundation of the enterprise. Chloe likely spent those next few hours celebrating her decisive victory. She probably poured high-end champagne in what used to be my corner office while drafting a self-congratulatory social media post about making tough calls as a modern leader. She had no idea that her hasty little power move had just ignited a corporate landmine buried deep within the founding documentation. 3 hours was all it took for her maiden leadership decision to transform into an unmitigated legal catastrophe. Long before she logged into her email, a specific clause inside the original shareholder agreement had already been deployed to every board member and major investor. Section 17C was a safeguard I specifically drafted years ago to protect the company from rogue actors and unchecked nepotism. It stated that if an executive without equity attempts to unilaterally terminate a senior officer without a formal board vote, all interim operational authority is immediately suspended. Furthermore, all voting power automatically reverts to the primary shareholder. That primary shareholder was not the visible founder or his newly appointed family members. It was me. While Chloe was measuring my former office for new decor, certified packets containing my notarized equity filings and time-stamped clause activations were arriving at every director home address. She assumed I was merely an old employee who could be discarded without consequence. She failed to realize that I had deliberately constructed the entire corporate architecture to withstand entitled opportunists who mistook family connections for genuine authority. By the time her afternoon coffee grew cold, her system credentials had been flagged as an unverified executive with 0 voting rights. My name never appeared on the glossy promotional materials or the executive team website. I preferred operating from the shadows, securing structure, legal leverage, and above all, absolute equity. While other executives fought over fancy job titles and commemorative plaques, I quietly negotiated ownership percentages during every major expansion and crisis resolution. 0.5% here, a full block of voting shares there. When our former CFO resigned amidst a financial audit, I bought his shares at a steep discount. When internal family disputes threatened total bankruptcy, I absorbed additional equity in exchange for handling the legal fallout discreetly. Over 20 long years, those small slices accumulated into a towering 72% controlling stake in the parent company. It was all legally registered in Delaware, complete with Section 17C fully intact. I originally wrote that clause after watching a naive relative of the founder attempt to fire an entire department during an emotional outburst. That incident taught me that inherited power is inherently unstable. True control does not reside in a shiny office door or a famous surname. Real control resides in the fine print, written late at night with paranoid investors who want absolute protection against incompetence. Chloe had walked directly into a corporate trapdoor that had remained dormant for nearly 2 decades. In her eagerness to mark her territory, she executed a illegal termination memo riddled with grammatical errors, completely unaware that she was forfeiting her own position in the process. While she attempted to order personal office supplies, the board of directors received an emergency notification titling the immediate suspension of executive authority. The founder was about to discover that his family legacy had just been thoroughly dismantled by his own daughter-in-law. The founder was on the 7th hole of an exclusive golf club when his personal attorney called him for the 3rd consecutive time. Barking into his phone with his usual impatience, he demanded to know why his afternoon game was being interrupted. The attorney did not mince words, ordering him back to headquarters immediately because his daughter-in-law had signed something catastrophic. Arriving at the corporate tower in record time, the founder marched into a tense conference room filled with pale faces, silent advisors, and a deeply concerned legal team. The general counsel opened a thick binder and read Section 17C aloud, explaining that Chloe had executed an unauthorized termination without board consent. Because she possessed zero equity, her unilateral action triggered an immediate revocation of all C-suite appointments made within the last 48 hours. The founder stood frozen, demanding to know who authorized the termination memo. When the attorney quietly confirmed that his daughter-in-law acted entirely alone, the color drained from the patriarch's face. He frantically attempted to downplay the situation, suggesting they simply issue an apology and rescind the paperwork. However, the legal counsel firmly shut down that possibility, explaining that the clause was fully active, notarized, and distributed to every major stakeholder. There was no take-back button in corporate governance. The founder sat down heavily, suddenly looking far older than his years. The attorney gently reminded him that, when he walked into the upcoming emergency board meeting, he needed to remember that the person he tried to cast aside controlled 72% of the business. Meanwhile, Chloe was attempting to settle into her new routine by ordering the IT department to permanently erase my digital credentials. The IT director stared at his screen, then opened the primary administrative portal. Bold red text clearly identified my profile as the master administrator, legal signatory, and 72% equity holder. Deactivating my account would instantly crash 3 compliance portals, freeze investor transfers, and block regulatory reporting. Instead of executing her order, the IT director calmly walked his laptop down to legal, leaving Chloe oblivious to the fact that her digital commands were being actively ignored. Sitting at her desk, Chloe attempted to post her pre-written statement about bold leadership on her social channels. Before she could hit publish, she noticed something strange happening across her enterprise software. Her financial approval rights were grayed out, her expense requests were instantly rejected, and her access to the main investor ledger was denied. The corporate network was systematically locking her out. Moments later, a direct message from our primary lead investor flashed on her personal phone, asking why she had attempted to touch the most untouchable figure in the firm. Panicking, Chloe deleted her draft post and stared at her screen in dead silence. Across the building, board members were quietly taking their seats in the primary conference room. The atmosphere inside was suffocating, stripped of all standard pleasantries and casual banter. Chloe entered the room wearing a sleek cream suit, attempting to maintain her polished demeanor. She moved toward the executive chair at the head of the table, only for the board chairman to stop her abruptly, informing her that the seat was strictly reserved. Confused and defensive, she demanded to know who held the reservation. The general counsel stepped forward, officially informing her that her appointment as Chief Strategy Officer was suspended effective immediately due to Section 17C. She scanned the room for support, but her father-in-law refused to make eye contact, and her husband stared blankly at his notepad. Desperate, she asked who had triggered the clause in the first place. The chairman responded calmly that the primary owner had initiated the protocol long before Chloe even stepped foot in the building. At precisely 3 o'clock, the boardroom door opened. I walked inside wearing my signature dark suit, carrying a single leather folder. I did not smile, nor did I offer a dramatic speech. Walking straight to the head of the table, I opened the file and formally requested an immediate binding vote to nullify every executive appointment made over the previous 2 days. The room remained dead silent as the chairman logged the motion into the official record. The founder sat slumped in his chair, completely stripped of the bravado that usually defined his presence. Chloe trembled in her seat, finally realizing that my physical absence from the office had never equated to a loss of control. I had simply allowed them to play with titles while I held the structural foundation. When a board member invited me to take a seat, I politely declined, choosing to remain standing at the head of the table. It was a quiet demonstration of absolute authority that no one in the room dared to challenge. Turning to the founder, I reminded him that my actions were designed to protect the enterprise he had foolishly handed over to children. The legal team confirmed that the majority shareholder vote was legally binding, and the board adjourned to finalize the transition paperwork. Afterwards, I invited the founder into an adjacent office for a private conversation. He slumped into a chair, admitting that he was completely at a loss for words. I laid two distinct documents on the table between us. The first was a complete buyout offer, allowing him to purchase my entire 72% stake at 10 times current market valuation, leaving him with a hollow shell of a company. The second document outlined a full corporate reorganization, keeping me as executive chairwoman, removing all family members from unearned executive roles, and subjecting every department to rigorous financial audits. He had 24 hours to make his decision. As I opened the door to leave, I looked back and reminded him that when his daughter-in-law marched into my office that morning, she did not make a simple mistake, she made a definitive choice. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the founder resignation email was broadcast to the entire organization, citing personal reasons for his immediate departure. Security politely escorted Chloe from the premises after her access badge failed at the security turnstiles, leaving her to hand over her keys in total silence. I walked into the main boardroom for our morning executive debrief, taking my rightful place at the head of the table. Surrounding me were actual industry experts, legal advisors, and compliance officers ready to execute real operational strategy. There were no celebratory speeches or dramatic announcements, just the quiet, methodical work of steering a massive enterprise forward. Power is never defined by a flashy title, a corner office, or a well-connected family name. Real power belongs to the person who understands the wiring inside the walls and holds the ink on the contract.